Hi everybody, welcome back to this week's history lessons. You'll be relieved to know that we're starting our final topic for Pitt's Appeal. So this is the beginning of topic 7. So we've done our 4 topics which were essay topics. So we've looked at Pitt, Liverpool and Great Reform Act, of course, and then foreign policy. And then more recently, we've been studying sources topics. So we've looked at Peel in opposition, so as leader of his party and as Prime Minister, so kind of Peel in power. We've now completed our work on Peel and social reform, so looking at living and working conditions. So summed up, that means looking at the Poor Law and looking at the Factory and Mines Act and that legislation. And so our final topic looks at Peel and pressure groups. So the beginnings of pressure groups, such as we're going to look at trade unions today and the start of that, and we're going to look at Chartism as a pressure group as well. You could lump the Anti-Corn Law League in here as well, but we tend to cover it when we look at Peel and the repeal of the Corn Laws in his time as Prime Minister. We're on to topic 7, which means that we will shortly have completed the Pitt Appeal course, which is really exciting news. So we're going to start off today. You might have heard of these people. We're going to start off today looking at almost a case study, if you like, of one of the very first incidences of the heavy-handedness of the law being applied to trade unions. And this group, as you can see, are called the Tolpuddle Martyrs, even. So the Tolpuddle Martyrs. And of course, if I was standing in front of you, I'd immediately pick on somebody and say, what does the word martyr mean? And as good students of Elizabeth I, you would all have answered that's somebody who is prepared to die for what they believe in. It's often associated with religion, isn't it? So it's a strong word to apply to a group of agricultural labourers that effectively just try to get better wages. But when you hear the story, you maybe understand why it caused such consternation. So let's have a look at the plaque on the picture. So it says, read the information below carefully. Within this cemetery lies George Lovelace. He, with his brother James, John and Thomas Stanfield, James Bryan and James Hammett, were condemned to penal servitude in 1834. So penal servitude means punishment for organising in Tolpuddle, Dorsetshire, England, a union of farm labourers. George Lovelace was sent to Van Diemen's Land, which you would know as Tasmania, and the others were sent to New South Wales, which of course is a province in Australia. Public indignation brought about their pardon and return to England, 1837. The case of the Tolpuddle Martyrs became a turning point in labour laws and practices in the United Kingdom. In 1844, all except Hammett migrated to this district. George Lovelace died near here on May the 6th, 1874. And if you want to know where they ended up, if you look at the small writing at the bottom, you'll see it says, erected by the Ontario Archaeological and Historic Sites Board. And hopefully the geographers amongst you would be able to tell us that Ontario is a province in Canada. So these labourers from Dorset in England in the 1830s somehow ended up living in Canada for the remains of their life, because of course we know that all of them ended up there, apart from Hammett. Okay, so who were they? Right, well, we can tell from that plaque that they are a group that organised. And as we read down, it tells us they organised a union of farm labourers. A union, a group that gets together. So we're starting on topic 7, which looks at trade unions. So trade unions, as the name suggests, are a group who share the same trade. So in the 1700s and 1800s and even earlier, it was not unusual for groups of tradespeople, tradesmen usually, to come together and form unions. And essentially these early unions even, were trying to protect their trade from, infringement by unskilled people. So it would stipulate rules. If you wanted to become a silversmith, for example, you were unable to just set yourself up in a local town and do that. You had to be apprenticed to a master craftsman in the silver trade. you would have to do a certain amount of years as an apprentice, and he would decide when and if you were able to qualify, and then you would be recognised by the local town guild. So unions were a phenomenon that had been around for a long time, and they were about the protection of trade. In this period, though, in the Industrial Revolution, the Tolpuddle Martyrs kind of starts a new type of union in a way. They start the idea of unions not particularly protecting a skill or a trade, but actually protecting the living and working conditions of the workers that are in them. So they were a group that tried to start a trade union for farmers or farm labourers. They didn't have any land, but they worked on the land. What happened to them? Well, the plaque tells us that they were transported to Australia and Tasmania as a punishment. And of course, in those days, that was the other end of the world. It was unlikely that you were coming back. Transportation, as we've already heard in our course, it's a serious punishment. Probably only the death penalty is worse. So you'd be subjected to a 6-week hellish journey on board a prison ship. And then when you reached Australia or Tasmania, you would do hard labour. So in the unforgiving sun, rock breaking, mining, you'd do long hours, be given a very meagre diet, and you'd be locked up. You know, you were a prisoner. So you worked in a chain gang. You'd be chained up and supervised and expected to work. So the consequences for your physical health would not be good, nor for your mental health, I would imagine. And why were they significant? I suppose what makes them the martyrs is what it says at the end of the plaque, that they were pardoned. So in other words, public support got behind them, and the government actually overturned their conviction because they had been convicted of a crime. So this is quite an interesting story with regard to trade unionism. So that just kind of introduces our topic. Right, let's move on then. So today, our title is How Important Were the Tolpuddle Martyrs of 1834? So as always, you're going to need a pen and pencil for this, pen and paper, a ruler, very important to underline your title. And we're going to watch a couple of videos and talk about, we're going to gather some information from those videos. And so there's nothing that you need other than that to complete this lesson. But obviously what would be helpful is to have access to the relevant pages in your textbook for just reading up on this after the lesson. And also, as always, there is an information booklet on this topic, which will be uploaded onto Schoology for you so that you can have a look at that. So, how important were they? So, our learning intention, our big inquiry for the next few lessons is to consider how effective were pressure groups in influencing the government. Did they have any sway politically? Success criteria for today. Describe 2 features of early trade unions. Explain how trade unions started to change after 1824, and judge how important trade unions were. In actual fact, these success criteria will go through into the next lesson as well. And then stretch and challenge to get you really thinking, how far were trade unions symptomatic of wider changes? How far do they reflect a change in the working class, a sense of, we've talked about it before, politicisation of the working class? They are becoming interested in the government, rules and regulations, and how that government can impact on their lives, because the way people live and work in the 1800s is changing more quickly than any time it ever had before. So I think it's true to say that the working class are a different breed to the lower classes that had gone before them. Okay, so let's move on. So think about these questions, and you may wish to write your answers down as well. What did Pitt's combination laws of 1799 do? And why? Can you think about the context for that? What happened to Pitt's combination law in 1824 and 1825 under the Liberal Tories of Lord Liverpool? And what does this tell us? What does that change tell us about attitudes towards trade unions in this period? So have a little pause, have a little think. Can you remember any of that? If you can't remember it, now is a good time to look back in your classwork, look back in your folder to the point in time when we were covering Pitt and the Radicals or the Liberal Tories, and see if you can find that out. When you found the answer, you can come back and switch me back on again, and I'll talk about what you should have found out. Okay, so we're back in the room. Hopefully you've gone away and looked those up. So what you should have found is that Pitt's Combination Law of 1799 banned the combination of workers in any form, and in effect that banned trade unions, because if you were not allowed to combine, there was no way that you could form a group to look for better wages, for example. Now, the context of that wasn't necessarily just aimed at trade unions. The context of it, of course, was this is the period of the French Revolution. And by 1799, 10 years into the revolution, when it was becoming very bloody and chaotic over the Channel, Pitt and his government were very concerned about the growth in radicalism, the rise in radicalism. So it was another example of a law from what we nickname Pitt's Reign of Terror, where he was, trying to pass legislation to crack down on radicalism. But in effect, it outlawed trade unions. Question 2, what happened to that law during the Liberal Tories period? Well, as you would imagine, the Liberal Tories repealed the law. So in 1824, Pitt's Combination Law of 1824 was completely repealed, which meant that workers were now free to form groups and organisations if they chose to do so. So trade unionism became legal once more. However, Liverpool being Liverpool and not really all that liberal when you look under the surface, his government in the following year passed another piece of legislation called the Amending Act, which said, OK, you can have a trade union, that's fine, but what you cannot do is strike. And of course, that made it very difficult for unions really to have any teeth. It was very difficult for them to place pressure on employers to listen to them if they couldn't strike, because of course that's the ultimate weapon of a worker, is to withdraw your work. So in effect, it kind of meant that trade unions couldn't really apply any serious pressure. And what does this tell us about attitudes towards trade unions? What does it tell us about attitudes towards the working class in general? I think after the French Revolution, successive governments in Britain had seen the working class as a potential threat. And I think that's true of Tory governments and Whig governments, if I'm honest. There was a sense that the working class, unchecked, could form a radical mob who would run riot through the streets of London and other cities, causing chaos and anarchy. They'd had a taste of it, haven't they, in 1832 with the Days of May and the riots that kind of in the lead up to the Great Reform Act. And I think governments were frightened to see the potential power of the working class. And then you've got groups like the Birmingham Political Union, which had managed to amass, kind of groups of workers 100,000 strong. So I think for governments in this period, there was a real sense that trade unions spelled trouble. They were rather wary of what could happen. Okay, right, well done. So if you want to jot any of that down, just pause me. And get those notes written down just as you would do if we were in class. You'd obviously be hanging on to my every word. Oh, what a fount of wisdom Mrs. Warrener is. Of course you would. Okay, so do feel free to pause it, get some of those kind of notes down, add to what you've already written, and I will see you for the next slide. Okay, so how important were these groups then? So what were trade unions? If you haven't got a clear definition already, get this written down and then put a nice big flowery cloud around it, or highlight it, or just a nice box, because it's a really important definition for you guys. So they were groups of workers organising together to get better working conditions. So that might be to do with their hours, it might be to do with wages. So an example early on from our period is wool workers in the West Country. What laws restricted them? So we're all the way back in 1721, the government worried about unions. So tailors in London were banned from forming unions to begin with. And of course that's before our time period, but it's helpful to understand the context. 1799, we've just talked about that, Pitt's Combination Act. 1710 to 1800, tradesmen's groups were prosecuted for conspiracy. So conspiracy is the crime of kind of conspiring or organising against authority. It's a very loose crime. It's possible to charge lots of people with conspiracy, I would imagine. So it wasn't as though there was a specific law against them, but they used old laws to bring people to trial, and that's certainly what happened in the case of the Tolpuddle Martyrs. And then 1824 and 1825, I've just mentioned both of those, so you should be pretty straightforward with those. What challenges did early trade unions face? Well, after the French Revolution broke out in 1789, they had to conceal or hide their meetings because, of course, after 1789, any groups of workers meeting were seen as potential radical threats. Businesses, obviously, wanted cheap workers, cheap labour, so they didn't want a worker that was in a trade union. So if anyone found out that you were in one of these groups, your chances of employment would be lower. So we then get to a situation where it's not illegal to be in a trade union, but it perhaps makes you undesirable as an employee. So trade unions start to become secretive, and then the government becomes more suspicious, as do employers, and so we get into a vicious circle. Think back to 1812, in the aftermath of the Napoleonic Wars, we've got that group known as the Luddites who attack machinery, in particular the new power looms, because they are worried about the loss of jobs in the weaving industry. It doesn't work. The government respond heavy-handedly. They make machine or frame breaking a capital punishment, in other words, punishable by death, and that spells the end for the Luddites. So attacking the machinery has not worked. And population growth has led to a new unskilled workforce. And again, when you lack specific skills in an area, it means that it's easy for you to be replaced. So employers had the upper hand because there was always a kind of willing pool of labour behind you. If you didn't like the hours or the wages, somebody else would be prepared to do that work. So it meant that trade unions didn't have an awful lot of power. Okay, and of course we've mentioned this already, repression by the government in general, the use of things like conspiracy or unlawful oaths to punish people who were in trade unions, so using old laws to punish trade unionism. Okay, moving on. So let's get on to our Tolpuddle Martyrs. You've got a couple of videos to watch now. So the first clip is the slightly longer one. It comes from Timelines TV. They're both available on YouTube, and I've put the clips onto Go for Schools for you. The second clip is 3 minutes long, and it's History Pod. I think they're the company that have produced that. They work really well together, those two clips, in order for you to be able to answer these questions. So if you've got the ability to print, you might want to just print this particular slide. The PowerPoint's on Schoology, so you can easily get that one slide. Or alternatively, just quickly jot down the questions, just like we would if it was in class. So if you just jot down the questions and then leave, 3-4 lines spare in between each question, then you can very easily just pop your answers in while you read the clips. So you need, as I say, you need to watch both clips, and while you're watching the clips, you should be able to find the answers to those questions. So if you want to flick over back to Go for Schools now and find the 2 clips for yourselves to watch, it will take you about 9-10 minutes in all to have a look at those. And then when you've watched the clips, come back here and we'll just talk about the answers. Okay, so hopefully you've had the chance now to watch those 2 short videos. They provide a really useful summary of the Tolpuddle Martyrs. So why was it harder for rural workers to look after themselves during this period? You should have got down something about the process of enclosure. And you might remember doing this. We normally cover it in year 8, I think, at St Ivo in the history department. But it's part and parcel of the agricultural revolution. In order to make farming more efficient, the old strip method was replaced with fields, the landscape that we see today. So it meant that the poorest villagers lost out, because unless they could prove that they owned a parcel of land, or indeed if their parcel of land was big enough to make a field, they had to have a certain amount to be part of that process. It meant that they lost everything. They lost access to the common land, they lost the small plot that they might have had in their family for generations. So they therefore lost their ability to forage for wild food, their ability to collect fuel, or just collect timber to perhaps repair a dwelling or cottage. They lost their ability to keep the odd animal, etc. So enclosure was a process that was happening. It happened since Elizabethan times, but with the agricultural revolution it became much, much more popular. So enclosure in the 1800s was, had really kind of covered most of the country. Question 2, what was the going rate for a farm labourer? I think we start on 10 shillings a week, and then by the time we get to the 1830s, it's down to 9 shillings a week. And in the first video, it said from 1833, it began to drop even more. So from 1833, we see another decline in rural wages. Question 3, why was this insufficient? Well, as the man explained, that would really only cover your bread for a week for a family. It wouldn't cover your rent, it wouldn't cover any ancillary things that you might need, candles to see at night, thread to repair your clothes because you're not going to be buying new clothes. No ASOS at that time. So it just didn't cover the essentials that people needed, hence that term, starvation wages. So you are in work, you are employed, and yet you still cannot afford to keep your family above the poverty line. And by that we mean the basic necessities for life, which is food, clothing and shelter. You could not afford all of those things. Why was the rate cut? Well, as it explained, it's a long-term thing really, but it's the recovery of population. We just alluded to that. And farm labourers, again, it's a largely unskilled workforce. You just need to be able to do hard work. And, there were plenty of people in the queue behind you for a job that were prepared to work for those wages. So, unfortunately, with population growth, the cards were all held by the employers and by the large landowners in rural areas. How are the Tolpuddle Martyrs different from other types of protests? Well, in both videos, it mentioned the swing riots. Now, the swing riots are agricultural riots that sweep the country 1830 to 1831. We did touch on them, I think, when we looked at the Great Reform Acts. They were nothing to do with politics. The swing riots were to do with the economy and working conditions. It was agricultural workers afraid that new machinery, like steam threshing machines, would take their work away from them. So they attacked landlords' property. They were furious at falling wages as well, set fire to hay barns, slaughtered livestock. And they were largely centred in this area, actually, in East Anglia. So in other areas, protests had been violent. The Tolpuddle Martyrs were different because they were, quite civilised in their approach. They set themselves up as a friendly society, was the term they used. And then they went to hand, a set of demands over to their landowner that they worked for, James Frampton. Number 6, why did their demands fail? Well, Frampton, of course, feared radicalism, saw them as a group of troublemakers, didn't want this to spread to his other labourers. And so, in concert with many of his social class at that time, he felt that they were a threat. And so he duly reported them to the authorities and had them charged. And what were they sentenced for? They were sentenced, this is one of Pitt's laws that was resurrected during his reign of terror, they were sentenced under the Unlawful Oaths Act. Because as it said in the second video, the initiation ceremony for joining the friendly society in Tolpuddle was to take a secret oath. And that was illegal. And so they were put on trial with the Unlawful Oaths Act, and they were found guilty and transported to Australia. Whoops, forgot that last question, but we can answer that now. What happened to them? So quick, get it written down. And we know the end of the story from the first slide, the plaque that was in the cemetery in Canada, and also from the second video. So they were transported, 5 of them were sent to Australia, 4 of them were sent to, no, can't add up. 5 were sent to Australia, 1 was sent to Tasmania, where they were sentenced to hard labour in a prison colony. But there was such an outcry about this case back at home that 800,000 signatures were collected on a petition and 100,000 marched to demand the release of these 6 men. And in 1836, the Home Secretary at the time, Lord John Russell, and you guys will remember him because he was the one that wrote the Great Reform Act. So he was Home Secretary in 1836, and of course he was in charge of the justice system, and he pardoned them, which meant he let them off. He overturned their conviction, and they returned to England. But 5 of them then emigrated to Canada. And you can't really blame them, can you? Okay, so those answers make up a good set of notes on the Tolpuddle Martyrs. So what was the aftermath? So in England, they were popular heroes. As we've said, 800,000 signatures were collected for their release. They organised a march, and in 1836 they were pardoned. Several streets have since been named in their honour. You can see there the banner on the right hand side of the screen is a modern banner celebrating Unite, which is a trade union today, and they're still using the symbol of the sycamore tree, and George Lovelace there in the middle, and the families and the other labourers gathered around, and the slogan of liberty or freedom at the bottom there. So how does the example of the Tolpuddle Martyrs show the weaknesses and strengths of trade unionism in this period? So you put your thinking hats on now. I've talked enough. What was it about their case that showed that they were weak? But then what else was there in this episode that showed maybe trade unions did have an element of strength about them? So I'll let you have a little think about that. You might want to jot down 2 headings, strengths, weaknesses, just, kind of gather your thoughts. So pause me, get that written down, and then when you're ready, we'll move on. Write a short paragraph explaining your answer. If you're feeling very keen, you can. So, how important were trade unions? I love this. So, look at that. Modern day, we've got, the beautiful banner that's been sewn. You can still buy a Tolpuddle Martyr mug. I got that picture off a website that sells these. So, it's a nice, lovely Christmas gift or birthday present for somebody, isn't it? I'm not sure if you can order them online, but, I'm sure what anybody would appreciate such a fine item such as that. So, even today, their names are still known, and it's a story that's kind of gone through time. And it's one of those, we used to talk about historical significance. Some things in history are remembered through the centuries and some things are forgotten. And it's, there's lots of amazing stories. So why is it that some stories stick, that they don't go away and they remain somehow relevant and interesting, even though, hundreds of years have passed? And this is an example of one of those stories. So why do trade unions today still celebrate the example of the Tolpuddle Martyrs? Why is there still a demand for merchandise with their names on? What is it about this story, do you think, that's made this stick throughout history? So again, there's no right or wrong for that. That's your opinion, isn't it? Have a little think and jot some ideas down. Okay, so hopefully you've had a chance to think about that. There we go. What's their legacy? But that's essentially what we're asking with the question. So just a little bit of a review. How important were the Tolpuddle Martyrs was our overall question today. So hopefully you feel now that you've got a sense that you would be able to answer that. And essentially that's tied up with that final slide there, isn't it? What's their legacy? Why are this group still remembered so widely? 2 features of early trade unions. So hopefully, as I say, next lesson touches on this in more detail, the different unions. But just using Tolpuddle as an example, I'm sure you could give 2 features. Explain how trade unions changed after 1824. Well, I've mentioned that a couple of times this lesson. They were legalised. But even after the legalisation of trade unions, they were still viewed as a threat by the authorities. And then finally, I can judge how important trade unions were. Well, we can't judge all trade unions yet, but we can look at the example of the Tolpuddle Martyrs and kind of make our, put forward our own opinion as to why this story is still significant in history. So next lesson, which will go up later this week, we'll be looking at other trade unions that kind of popped up at this time. But I hope you've enjoyed that one, and you should now have plenty of written work. And as I say, I would hope you would be doing this anyway as good practice, but as always, you've got your independent learning tasks to complete. So they are in your course booklet, and they follow very closely the pages in the textbook. So if you would like to look up trade unions and the Tolpuddle Martyrs, in your orange Pitt Peel textbook, it's chapter 7, and it starts on page 165 with trade unions in general. And page 171 is where you'll find some extra information on the Tolpuddle Martyrs. So it's worth making sure you just consolidate your knowledge with that further reading. And there is an information sheet, pink pages. In actual fact, this one is bright pink as well. It's quite a nice one. A pink page is available, which is on Schoology, so feel free to have a look at that as well. Okay, wonderful. Well done, guys. Over and out.